Hi everyone, my name is Li Wei. My project explores how established children's media characters can be redesigned for a contemporary cross-culture and more mature audience while still preserving their original identity, design intent, and meaning. For this project, I chose Kamen Rider V3, a children's media character originally designed in 1973, as my main character. I became interested in this topic because in recent years we've been seeing more and more classic characters being brought back through films, games, all kinds of reboots and adaptations. The original audience of these characters have grown older, and at the same time, media has become much more global. So when we redesign old characters today, we're not only designing for different age group, but also for people from different cultural backgrounds. One problem I noticed is that modernizing can sometimes simply mean adding more realism, complexity details. This can make a character look more contemporary, but it still remove some in some level it remove of the things that made the original character memorable in the first place. So one of the main question behind my project become how much can we change classic characters before it stops feeling like the same character. For my initial research, I looked at this series around about the shapes, colors, character identities in character designs. And I also looked at examples such as Shin Ultraman, Power Rangers, and Godzilla Minus One to understand how other established characters have been redesigned over the years. From this research, I developed a simple approach for my own design process: preserve, reinterpret, modernize. The idea is to first identify and preserve the most important visual information from the original character, then reinterpret the elements that can be changed, and finally modernize the design through things like proportion, materials, and details. Before redesigning V3, I compared Shotaro Inomori's early concept artworks within the final suit using the 1973 TV series. From this, I identified several important elements of V3's visual identity, including the red, green, white, and silver color palette, the green component's eyes, and the insect's-like face, as well as the elements such as the chest armors, belt, boots, and the capes. One interesting issue was that the early concept and the final TV suit was actually quite different in some parts. So I compared both of them and tried to understand which elements were important or more important to the original design intent, and which later elements had become part of the character's identity through the years of audience familiarity. For the redesign itself, I kept these key visual elements, but changed the body proportions, silhouette, armor structures, and the level of details. I wanted my version of Kamen Rider V3 to feel more mature and physically powerful while still keeping the sense of speed and elegance of the original design. Another major direction was the biochemical armor. I didn't want V3 to simply look like a person wearing complicated biochemical armor. I want the insect's influence to feel like it was actually part of his body, as as the original intent. So some of the armor was redesigned to look more like insects, with more organic surface details. I also kept the original color palette, but adjusted the saturation and materials to make the colors feel more believable on a realistic 3D characters. After finishing the concept design, I moved to 3D production. My main software was Photoshop, Maya, and ZBrush. I use Photoshop for the concept and the color development. Maya is mainly for hard surface elements like the helmets, boots, and belts, and ZBrush for the body and the biochemical armor and high resolution details. I used these different approaches because the mechanical parts needs to have like clear and harder edges, while the biochemical armor needs to follow the body more naturally and have a more organic surface. Once the final design was completed, I carried out an anonymous survey with 17 participants to see whether the redesign had achieved my original goals. Overall, the feedback was quite positive. Most participants would still be able to recognize the core identity that V3 have in the redesign. This suggests that the elements I identified earlier, such as the color, facial structure, and iconic costume participant components, were effective in maintaining character recognition. Participants also generally felt that the character looked more modern and mature, which suggests that the changes to proportion materials and the surface details were working as I intended. The feedback on my target audience was also positive. Overall, the redesign was seen as suitable for BBFC 12A audience, and as I was aiming for. The participants also come from different countries, age groups, and culture backgrounds. So they have different culture backgrounds. So this gives some positive evidence that the design has a level of cross-cultural readability and appeal. However, because the survey only involved 17 participants, I don't think this sample is large enough to make a universal conclusion. One of the most interesting things I found from this survey was that character recognition and character feeling for the audience are not necessarily the same thing. Even though most participants could still recognize V3 and feel that the core identity has been preserved, some also felt that redesign have lost part of the original ritual feel of the character. This suggests that keeping things like colors, eyes, armor, and cape may be enough to make the character recognizable, but it may not be enough to completely preserve the feeling people associate with the original character. So for me, the main finding of this project is that modernizing classical characters is not simply about adding more details or making more realistic or have more visual complexities. The more important question is not whether the character looks modern enough, but how far you can modernize that without losing the original identity and design intent of the original characters. This brings me back to the approach I developed during the project: preserve, reinterpret, and modernize. First, understand what actually make the characters who they are, decide what elements should stay and which elements can be taking one step forward to make it more realistic and having more details, and which part can be exactly which part can be modernized. If I continue this research or try to make it better, the next thing I would like to explore is how we can better analyze, define, and possibly even measure the idea of the character's feelings, and understand which less obvious visual elements actually create that kind of feeling for the audiences.